A great empire rose in the west. It was not Tenochtitlan. It did not speak Nahuatl. It did not worship Huitzilopochtli. Yet it stood firm when the Aztecs came with fire and steel. In the highlands of what is now western Mexico, far from the lakes of the Valley of Mexico, a different power grew strong. The people called themselves Purépecha. The world would come to know them as the Tarascans. Their empire was not as famous as the Aztecs, but it was just as real, just as strong, and it never fell to the might of the Mexica. While the Aztecs conquered city after city, the Tarascan state remained untouched, not because it was hidden, not because it was weak, but because it was ready. It fought back, and it won. This is the story of how one people refused to be broken. Most histories speak only of the Aztecs, of Montezuma, of Tenochtitlan, but the Tarascans were there. They were not silent, they were not afraid. They built cities, they forged weapons, they ruled a land rich in copper and timber. They created a kingdom that matched the Aztecs in size, wealth, and strength. And when war came, they did not run. They stood, they fought, they held their ground. This is not a forgotten tale, it is a forgotten truth. We begin long before the Spanish arrived, before Cortés, before the fall of empires. We go back to the roots, to the soil, to the first signs of power in the Purépecha heartland. The Tarascan world began in the forests and lakes of Michoacán. Around Lake Pátzcuaro, villages grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. By the 1300s, a new political force was rising. Unlike the city-states of central Mexico, the Tarascans built a centralized kingdom. One ruler, one law, one army. Their capital was Tzintzuntzan. It sat on the shores of the lake. Its name meant place of the hummingbirds. It was not just beautiful, it was powerful. Pyramids rose on the hills. Canoes moved across the water. Farmers tilled the land. Artisans shaped copper into tools and weapons. The Tarascans did not copy others. They made their own way. They had no writing system like the Maya, but they kept records. They used memory. They used messengers. They built a state that worked. And they faced a rising storm. To the east, the Aztecs were expanding fast. By the late 1400s, they ruled a vast region. They demanded tribute. They took prisoners. They claimed divine right to rule. But when they turned west, they met resistance. The Tarascans said no. They did not bow. They did not pay. They fought, and they won. This is not legend. This is history. Spanish records confirm it. Indigenous accounts confirm it. Archaeology confirms it. The Tarascan Empire was real. It was strong, and it stood against the Aztecs when no one else could. But how? What made them different? Who led them? What battles were fought? These are the questions we will answer. We will walk through their world. We will meet their kings. We will see their wars. We will learn how they built a nation that refused to fall. This is not a story of violence alone. It is a story of pride, of skill, of unity. It is the story of a people who looked at the most powerful empire in Mesoamerica and did not blink. Let us begin at the beginning. Long before the Aztecs became a threat, the land around Lake Pátzcuaro was home to many small communities. These villages were scattered along the lake shores and nestled in the surrounding hills. The people lived off the land. They farmed maize, beans, and squash in the fertile soil. They fished in the deep, clear waters of the lake. They gathered reeds and wood from the marshes. They raised turkeys and dogs for food. Life was simple, but stable. Trade connected the villages. Obsidian from nearby mountains was shaped into sharp tools. Clay was molded into pots and bowls. These goods moved from town to town. Markets grew. Some settlements became more important than others. Leaders began to emerge, men who could settle disputes, lead hunts, and speak for the group. In the 1200s, changes were taking place. New ideas spread. Power was no longer shared equally. Some families gained influence. Some towns grew stronger. This was not sudden. It happened over generations. But the result was clear. A shift from small, independent communities to larger, more organized societies. This change was different from what was happening in central Mexico. There, city-states like Texcoco, Tlacopan, and Tenochtitlan ruled their own lands. They formed alliances. They fought wars. But each kept its own ruler and laws. In the West, the Tarascans took a different path. They began to build a single kingdom. The man who started this change was Tariacuri. He lived in the early 1300s. He was not born a king. He was not said to have come from the gods. But he was wise. He was strong. He saw that the people were weak when divided. He believed that unity would bring safety and strength. Tariacuri traveled from village to village. He spoke to elders. He listened to their concerns. He offered protection in exchange for loyalty. He did not always use force. Often he used gifts, promises, and marriage alliances. But when a town refused to join, he acted. He was not cruel, but he was firm.
His first major success was at Pátzcuaro. He made it his capital. From there, he sent messages to nearby towns. He placed his sons and nephews in key places. He gave them authority, but they answered only to him. 3 cities became the heart of the new kingdom: Pátzcuaro, Tzintzuntzan, and Ihuatzio. Each was ruled by one of his close relatives. Tariacuri's nephew, Hikingahe, ruled Pátzcuaro. His son, Hiripan, ruled Tzintzuntzan. His other son, Tangashuan, ruled Ihuatzio. This was not a loose alliance. It was a planned system of rule. The 3 cities worked together. They shared resources. They supported each other in war. When Tariacuri died, he did not leave chaos. He left a clear plan. His successors followed it. They continued to expand. They strengthened the bonds between towns. They built temples. They honored the gods. They kept order. This system of rule was unique in Mesoamerica. Most cultures did not have a single ruler over such a large area. The Maya had city-states. The Zapotecs had a strong center at Monte Alban, but their control was limited. The Aztecs ruled through a triple alliance, but even they allowed local rulers to stay in power as long as they paid tribute. The Tarascans were different. Their empire was centralized. The Tzintzi, the supreme ruler, held real power. He was not just a first among equals. He was the head of a state. By the 1400s, the Tarascan Empire had become a true empire. It had a government with clear ranks. Officials collected tribute in the form of food, cloth, and labor. Roads were built to connect cities. Runners carried messages quickly across the land. Storehouses were filled with maize, beans, and dried fish. These were used in times of war or drought. The capital moved from Pátzcuaro to Tzintzuntzan. The new city sat on a peninsula jutting into Lake Pátzcuaro. It was easy to defend. It had fresh water. It had space for homes, temples, and markets. Tzintzuntzan became the political and religious center of the empire. The Tzintzi lived there. The high priests served there. The main temple was dedicated to Curicauhiri, the fire god. He was the protector of the Tarascan people. His symbol was the flame. His priests lit fires in sacred hearths. They believed he gave strength to the rulers and warriors. The empire expanded beyond the lake region. It reached north into the Sierra Madre Mountains. It stretched south to the hot lowlands near the Pacific coast. It took control of salt springs, timber forests, and copper mines. One of the most important resources was copper. The Tarascans were the only major civilization in Mesoamerica to master metalworking on a large scale. They mined copper from the hills near the town of Inguaran. They heated the ore in clay furnaces. They shaped it using stone hammers and molds. They made copper axes for cutting wood, copper chisels for carving stone, copper needles for sewing. Most importantly, they made copper weapons, knives, spear points, and hatchets. This gave them a real advantage in war. Other cultures still used obsidian, volcanic glass, for their blades. Obsidian is sharp, but it breaks easily. Copper is tougher. It can be repaired. It lasts longer. Tarascan warriors carried copper-tipped spears. They used slings to throw stones at long range. They wore armor made of thick cotton, padded and quilted. This armor could stop arrows and obsidian blades. Their armies were not just strong, they were organized. Soldiers were grouped by rank and region. Officers gave commands. Scouts moved ahead of the main force. Spies gathered information from enemy lands. The state had a system of control. Each region had a governor. These governors reported to the Catsonsi. They collected tribute. They kept peace. They called up soldiers when needed. The Tarascans also had a network of runners. These men traveled fast along the roads. They carried messages between cities. They could cover long distances in a single day. This allowed the rulers to respond quickly to threats. By the late 1400s, the Tarascan Empire ruled over an area of about 75,000 square kilometers. That is larger than modern-day Ireland. It included forests, lakes, mountains, and coastal plains. It had more than 2 million people. This was not a loose collection of tribes. It was a unified state with laws, taxes, and a standing army. And it was growing stronger. But to the east, danger was rising. The Aztec Empire was expanding fast. Under rulers like Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I, and Axayacac, the Mexica of Tenochtitlan conquered lands across central Mexico. They defeated the Tepanecs. They took the Gulf Coast. They demanded tribute from conquered peoples. They now looked west. Michoacán was rich. It had copper. It had timber. It had fertile land. The Aztecs wanted it. They also wanted captives. Their religion required human sacrifice. Thousands of prisoners were taken each year to be offered to the gods. The Tarascans were a prime target. In the 1470s, the Aztec Emperor Axayacatl sent an army into Tarascan territory. He believed the campaign would be easy. He expected the Tarascans to surrender. He was wrong. The Tarascan forces met the Aztecs at the border. The battle took place near a town called Taximaroa. The Tarascans used the mountainous terrain to their advantage. They ambushed the Aztec troops. They cut off their supply lines. They attacked at night. The Aztec army was destroyed. Few soldiers returned to Tenochtitlan. Axayacatl was shocked. This was the first time the Aztecs had suffered such a defeat in a major campaign. He tried again. He sent more troops. He formed alliances with tribes on the eastern edge of Tarascan lands. He believed that if he attacked from multiple sides, he could break through. But the Tarascans were ready. They had spies in Aztec territory. They knew the plans before the armies moved. They shifted their forces. They fortified key passes. Another battle was fought near Chirapan. Again, the Tarascans won. They captured Aztec officers. They took their weapons. They burned their camps. The Aztecs began to fear them. They gave the Tarascans a name, Mixca, people of the fish. It was not a term of respect. It was a mark of fear. The Aztecs believed the Tarascans were not fully human. They said they came from the water. They said they were fierce and unpredictable. The Tarascans did not care.
They had defended their land. They had proven they could fight. Under rulers like Tzintzuntzan and later Tarascan II, the empire grew stronger. Fortresses were built along the eastern border. Training schools for warriors were established. Copper production increased. The Tarascans did not seek to conquer the Aztecs. They only wanted to be left alone. But they were not passive. They launched raids into Aztec territory. They attacked supply lines. They freed tribes that had been forced to pay tribute. They showed other peoples that the Aztecs could be resisted. This was a quiet revolution. No one in Tenochtitlan spoke of these defeats. The official records do not mention them. The Aztecs erased their losses from history. But the Tarascans remembered. Their oral histories tell of great victories, of leaders who stood firm, of warriors who never ran. The first major clash between the Tarascans and the Aztecs came in the 1470s. It was not a small raid, it was a full-scale invasion. The Aztec Emperor Axayacatl, ruler of Tenochtitlan, ordered a large army to march west into Tarascan lands. His goal was clear: conquer Michoacán, take its resources, and force the Tarascans into tribute. Axayacatl believed the campaign would be quick. The Aztecs had defeated many powerful enemies. They had crushed the Tepanecs, subdued the Tlaxcalans, and brought city after city under their rule. They demanded maize, cotton, cacao, jade, and captives for sacrifice. Most peoples either surrendered or were destroyed. But the Tarascans were different. They did not wait to be attacked. They prepared. They knew war was coming. For years they had heard of Aztec cruelty. They knew what happened to those who lost. So they built defenses. They trained warriors. They placed scouts along the eastern border. When the Aztec army crossed into Tarascan territory, they entered a trap. The battle took place near a town called Taxamarua. This was a border region, rugged and forested. The land sloped upward into hills, making movement difficult for a large force. The Tarascans used this to their advantage. They did not meet the Aztecs in open field combat, where the Mexica often won through sheer numbers and shock tactics. Instead, the Tarascans fought from high ground. They ambushed the advancing troops. They attacked supply lines. They cut off retreat routes. The fighting was fierce. Arrows and sling stones rained down from above. Tarascan warriors armed with copper-tipped spears and wooden shields charged in coordinated groups. Their padded cotton armor protected them from Aztec weapons. The Aztec army was not prepared for this kind of warfare. They were used to frontal battles, where they could overwhelm the enemy with numbers. Here, in the narrow passes and thick woods, their formations broke apart. Commanders lost contact with their units. Supplies ran low. Few survived the battle. Historical sources, including later Spanish records and Tarascan oral histories, agree on the outcome. The Aztec force was crushed. Thousands of soldiers were killed or captured. The survivors fled back across the border. Axayacatl was stunned. This was the first time in decades that an Aztec imperial campaign had ended in total defeat. He had not only failed to conquer new land, he had lost a major army without gaining anything. He was humiliated. But he did not give up. In the years that followed, he sent more troops into Tarascan territory. He tried new routes. He formed alliances with tribes living on the edge of the empire, groups who resented Tarascan power and hoped to gain favor with the Aztecs. Yet every attempt failed. The Tarascans were always ready. They had a system of runners who carried messages from border outposts to the capital Tzintzuntzan. Scouts watched the frontier day and night. When Aztec movements were detected, the Tarascan army mobilized quickly. Another major battle occurred near a town called Charapan.
further south along the border. Again, the Tarascan used terrain to their advantage. They lured the Aztec forces into a valley and attacked from both sides. The Mexica were surrounded. This time, the Tarascans captured high-ranking Aztec officers. These prisoners were not sacrificed, as the Aztecs did with their captives. Instead, they were held and questioned. The Tarascans wanted to learn about Aztec plans, weapons, and weaknesses. They took Aztec weapons as trophies. They burned enemy camps. They sent the survivors back with a message: "Do not return." The Aztecs began to fear the Tarascans. In their records, they referred to them as Mixca, meaning people of the fish. This name did not come from respect. It came from unease. The Aztecs believed the Tarascans were strange, not fully part of the civilized world. They said they came from the water. They said they were fierce and unpredictable. The Tarascans did not care. They had defended their land. They had proven they could fight. The Tarascans did not care about the name. They cared about survival. They kept strengthening their defenses. Under their ruler, Tzintzuntzan, who ruled in the late 1400s, the empire became even more organized. Tzintzuntzan was not just a warrior, he was a strategist. He built a line of fortresses along the eastern border. These were not just simple walls, they were military outposts with storage, housing, and signal towers. From these forts, Tarascan forces could respond to any invasion within days. He also expanded military training. Young men from across the empire were brought to special schools where they learned combat, discipline, and loyalty to the Kazanchi. These warriors were not conscripts, they were professionals. Copper production was increased. Workshops in towns like Inguaran and Tzintzuntzan worked year-round, producing weapons and tools. The Tarascans did not have iron, but they made the most of copper. Their metalworkers were highly skilled. They could anneal copper to make it stronger. They shaped it into blades that held an edge longer than obsidian. Tzintzuntzan also used diplomacy. He reached out to tribes living near Aztec lands, groups like the Matlatzinca, the Chantal, and the Nahua-speaking peoples of the Balsas River region. These peoples were under Aztec rule. They paid heavy tribute. They lived in fear of raids for captives. The Tarascans offered them protection. They promised trade. They offered military support. They said the Aztecs could be resisted. Many of these groups listened. Some broke away from Aztec control. Others refused to cooperate with Aztec armies moving toward Michoacán. This weakened the Mexica war effort. It made supply lines longer. It made campaigns harder. The war was not just fought with weapons. It was fought with ideas. The Tarascans understood that fear and loyalty could be more powerful than swords. They did not try to conquer Tenochtitlan. That would have been impossible. The Aztec capital was too far, too well defended, and too powerful. But they did not need to attack. They only needed to defend. And they did it well. In 1486, a new Aztec emperor took power, Ahuitzotl. He was young. He was ambitious. He wanted glory. He had heard of the defeats in the West. He saw them as a stain on Aztec honor. He vowed to crush the Tarascans. Ahuitzotl gathered one of the largest armies ever assembled by the Aztecs. He called on all the subject states to send troops. He brought in warriors from as far as the Gulf Coast and Oaxaca. He marched west with determination. But again, he failed. The Tarascan defenses were too strong. The border fortresses held. The terrain slowed the Aztec advance. The Tarascan army, well-fed and well-armed, met them in strong positions. Ahuitzotl could not break through. After weeks of fighting and heavy losses, he was forced to retreat.
Thousands of his soldiers died, not in battle alone, but from hunger, disease, and ambushes during the withdrawal. He never tried again. No Aztec emperor after him launched a major campaign against the Tarascans. This was a turning point in Mesoamerican history. For the first time, a major imperial campaign by the Aztecs had ended in complete failure. And it was not a single event. It was a pattern. The Tarascans had defeated the Aztecs in battle after battle. This was not luck. It was skill. It was planning. It was unity. The Tarascan Empire had proven it could stand against the strongest military power in the region. But the victory was not just military. It was moral. News of the Tarascan resistance spread. Tribes under Aztec rule began to hope. If the Tarascans could resist, maybe others could too. The idea of rebellion, long suppressed, began to grow. Yet the Tarascans did not lead revolts. They did not send armies to free other peoples. They did not seek to build an empire of their own beyond their borders. Their goal was simple: freedom. They wanted to govern themselves. They wanted to keep their religion. They wanted to live without fear of Aztec raids. Still, their example mattered. They showed that the Aztecs were not invincible. They showed that resistance was possible. Behind their success was more than weapons and walls. It was their political system. The Tarascan state was divided into 4 main regions, each governed by a high official called a calpixque. These governors were loyal to the Kazanchi. They collected tribute, kept order, and raised troops when needed. Taxes were collected in goods: maize, beans, cloth, salt, and copper. These were stored in central warehouses in Tzintzuntzan and other major cities. In times of war or famine, the stores were opened to feed the people. Roads connected the empire. They were not as grand as Inca roads, but they were well maintained. Runners carried messages between cities in a single day. This allowed fast communication and quick response to threats. Justice was enforced. Disputes were settled by local judges who answered to higher officials. Theft, violence, and disloyalty were punished. When war came, the entire system worked together. Farmers supplied food, artisans made weapons, warriors fought, leaders planned. This was not chaos. This was order, and it worked. Few records from the Aztec side speak of these defeats. The Mexica did not write about losing. Their codices celebrate victories. They list tributary towns. They show rulers receiving gifts from subject peoples. But there is no record of Taximaroa, no mention of Charapan, no account of Ahuitzottl's failed campaign. They erased it. They pretended it never happened. But the Tarascans remembered. Their oral histories, passed down for generations, tell of great battles, of leaders who stood firm, of warriors who never ran, of victories that saved the nation. When the Spanish arrived in the 1520s, they found a people who were proud and independent. The Tarascans did not speak of past defeat. They spoke of strength. And the Spaniards confirmed it. In their reports, they noted that the Tarascans had never paid tribute to the Aztecs. Not one bag of maize, not one feather, not one drop of blood. This was rare. Every other major group in central Mexico, Tlaxcalans, Cholulans, Zapotecs, Mixtecs, had been forced to submit. Only the Tarascans had stood their ground, and they had done it by force. They were not spared by distance. They were not ignored. They were actively attacked. And they won. This history is not just about war. It is about courage. It is about the power of unity. It is about a people who looked at the most powerful empire of their time and said no. They did not conquer. They did not destroy. They protected. And in doing so, they changed the story of Mesoamerica.
The war that changed everything was not fought in Tenochtitlan. It was fought in the mountains and forests of Michoacán by a people who refused to fall. At the heart of the Tarascan resistance was a man named Tangaksuan II. He became Kazonsi around 1520. He ruled at the moment of greatest danger. The Aztecs were still a threat, but a new enemy was coming. The Spanish had landed. Hernán Cortés was marching inland. Tangaksuan knew the reports. He heard of coastal towns destroyed, of strange men on horseback, of weapons that thundered. He faced a choice: join the Aztecs, fight the Spanish alone, seek peace. He chose carefully. First, he sent spies to Tenochtitlan. He wanted to know the strength of both sides. What he learned shocked him. The Spanish were few, but their weapons were deadly. Their horses terrified warriors. Their guns killed from afar. And the Aztecs were not united. Many subject peoples hated them. They saw the Spanish as a chance to break free. Tangaksuan made his decision. He would not help the Aztecs. He would not attack the Spanish. He would wait. He strengthened his borders. He gathered food. He prepared for war. But he also sent a message to Cortés. Peace, he said. Trade, he offered. Stay away, he warned. Cortés was busy. He was fighting Montezuma. He did not respond. Then, in 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. The Aztec Empire was gone. Cortés turned his eyes west. He wanted the Tarascan lands. He sent a small force under Cristobal de Olid. Tangaksuan met them not with war, but with gifts. He gave gold. He gave food. He offered friendship. Olid accepted. But Cortés was suspicious. He believed Tangaksuan was hiding treasure. He feared a rebellion. In 1522, he sent another captain, Nuño de Guzmán. Guzmán was cruel. He wanted power. He wanted gold. He entered Tarascan lands with an army. Tangaksuan went to meet him in peace. He bowed. He offered loyalty to the king of Spain. Guzmán did not care. He accused Tangaksuan of rebellion. He had him arrested. He tortured him. Then, in 1530, he had him executed. Tangaksuan died not in battle, not by the hand of the Aztecs, but by the man who claimed to bring peace. His death marked the end of Tarascan independence, but not their spirit. Even after conquest, the people held to their language. They kept their customs. They remembered their past. And they remembered Tangaksuan. He was not a conqueror. He was a protector. He had ruled a free nation. He had faced 2 empires, and he had tried to save his people. His story is not of triumph. It is of tragedy. But it is also one of dignity. He stood when others fell. He spoke when others were silent. He led when fear could have ruled. The Tarascan Empire did not survive the Spanish, but it had survived the Aztecs. That was no small thing, and Tangaksuan was its last true king. The Tarascan Empire is gone. Its pyramids are silent. Its rulers are dust. Its emis have long since laid down their weapons, but its story remains. It is a story of resistance, of strength, of a people who said no. They were not the largest empire. They were not the most famous, but they were the only ones who defeated the Aztecs in open war. They did not do it once. They did it many times. They protected their land. They protected their way of life. They were skilled in metal. They were smart in war. They were united in purpose. And when the Spanish came, They tried to survive with wisdom. Tangaksuan chose peace. He failed, but his choice was brave. Today, the Purépecha people still live in Michoacán. They speak their language. They farm the same lands. They fish in Lake Pátzcuaro. They remember. They tell stories of the Cazonsi, of the copper warriors, of the battles that saved their home. Few history books teach this tale, but it is true. The Tarascans stood up to the Aztecs, and they did not fall. They proved that courage is not measured by size, but by will. They had no stone temples as grand as Tenochtitlan, no armies as vast as the Mexica, but they had something stronger.
They had unity. They had pride. They had a reason to fight. And, in the end, that was enough. We remember the Aztecs for their power. We remember the Maya for their stars. We remember the Inca for their mountains. Let us also remember the Tarascans for their defiance, for their survival, for their quiet strength. They were not loud. They were not cruel. They were not conquerors. They were protectors. And in a world of empires that fed on war, that was a rare thing. So when you hear of the great civilizations of the Americas, do not forget the people of the West, the ones who stood firm, the ones who said no. The Tarascans, the empire that stood up to the Aztecs and won.